I'm actually going to go through 2 slides really quickly and take you on to a list of key applications. Here is a beginning of some key applications and sources of ahas, possible sources of ahas for your clients. Notice the training and development emphasis, whether it's with individuals or with groups of individuals or teams. And please also notice that selection and choosing who to promote are not included on the list. Isabel always said that when individuals went through an MBTI experience, she wanted them to have a slight boost, a positive boost to their self-esteem. So selection and promotion decisions based on MBTI results, that's one of the reasons why that's not on the list. Now for each one of these key applications, and there are others, but these are the main ones that come up for me, there are sets of resources to help you administer, interpret, and deliver workshops and information in each one of these areas. And you can get those resources from CPP and by looking at the CPP website. Now the first one on the list is team building. It's a classic application for type. And let me show you the next slide. Again, you're going to see a type table. And notice that the descriptions are not there on this type table. This is one that we would use in a team building environment. Imagine you've met the individuals on the team, you've spent some time with them, you've explained the notions of type, you have brought their reports likely with you, or perhaps you've administered the MBTI at the workshop with a self-scorable MBTI form. You've had each people select their type, they've verified their type, and now you're bringing them together as the team, and you present a team table something like this. And you would go through the exercise as indicated underneath the type table, saying, well, of the 15 people on this team, how many people have extroverted preferences? And we'd say, oh, there happen to be 10 of the 15 people here have preferences for extroversion. And this information would get noted below the type table. And you go through the other 3 dichotomies. How many people here have preferences for sensing or for intuition as a way of gathering information? And then on to how many people here in this team of 15 have preferences for thinking or feeling as a way of making decisions? And then finally for J and P, for lifestyle, for judging and perceiving. So once this is all tallied up, it is possible then to make some proposals about a team type. That is, what does this team look like to itself, perhaps, and to the rest of the organization? And what might some of the likely strengths and possible blind spots be for a team that has these characteristics? You can also go on to say, well, what about each one of the individuals on the team? How does their personal 4-letter type compare to the team type? And it might help each individual understand why parts of team life are enjoyable and parts of team life feel awkward or not very satisfactory. So that's one of the applications of using type in a team building sort of application. I mentioned another key application was management training and leadership development. And on the next slide, you'll see a page that comes from a booklet called Introduction to Type and Leadership. And you can imagine, again, you've worked with an individual, you've gone through that process of administering the instrument, of getting back their results, of verifying their results. For this particular individual, we've identified him or her as having ESTJ preferences. You can see them, this page that describes people with ESTJ preferences, so-called the efficient drivers. You can see off to the upper right-hand corner of the page that the ESTJ type is highlighted in that miniature type table. And there are proposed some possible assets and challenges of the type relative to leadership. So I would use information like this with a client, have them highlight things they agree with, have them circle things that they question, and together we would go through the information and come up with a description of strength and style, as well as some possible developmental opportunities for that individual. So you can see how you would use the information in a booklet like this for helping with management and leadership development. I also mentioned in the key applications that that career development was a good possibility for using the MBTI too, and I wanted to show you a couple of pages on the next slide of pages from the MBTI career report. And what's interesting about this one, I know it's hard to see, we're trying to get as much information onto this slide as we could. In the upper right-hand corner of this page, you'll see Jane Sample is the person that responded to the items. And you can download this report from the CPP website. And you can see in red letters off to the upper right-hand corner, it's suggested and proposed that Jane's preferences are for ENFP. And on this particular page of the career report, it suggests how ENFPs approach the process of career development. And it suggested that, for example, that ENFPs tend to be very comfortable with the networking aspects of the career development process, but that ENFPs also struggle sometimes with the planning, scheduling, and follow-up that's required in the career development process. So the career report, once type has been verified, the career report gives a career coach some points to make for this individual in terms of approaching the whole process of career development. The career report also, and it's shown on the next slide, also suggests, again, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice that Jane Sample's ENFP preferences are highlighted. And I know, again, it's hard to see this information, but the length of the bar graphs suggests other occupations that people with ENFP preferences are drawn to. And the occupations are organized by ONET job family categories in this report. The ONET is the Occupational Information Network website that has been established by the U.S. Department of Labor. And it has identified what it refers to as job families, and the MBTI information fits beautifully with those job families to show you, well, in this instance, people with ENFP preferences, what sorts of occupations do they generally gravitate towards? And you can see, perhaps you can see from this page, that they are drawn to the helping professions. And by the short bar graphs, that they tend to stay away from professions that require detail and analysis and the like. So you can see how the knowing your MBTI preferences can be very helpful for making those decisions in the career development process. I wanted to take you on now to some key concepts. On the next slide, one of the key concepts that is suggested to be pursued in an MBTI workshop is referred to as the order of preferences. And you can see again, here's a type table. And for each one of the 16 types, what happens here is that the two middle letters, that is sometimes referred to as the function pairs, are indicative of how one takes in information and how one makes decisions. And listed under each one is the order that these functions would happen in. So for that ISTJ in the upper left-hand quadrant, you can see there are two middle letters, or S and T. And the first function is sensing. That is, this is the commander-in-chief for an ISTJ, the sensing function of facts, history, how did we get here, pragmatics, what does the data say? And that kind of thinking is also aided by the second function of thinking. That is, remember, the logic, the order, the impartiality, the consequence. So that combination of S and T is the source of some of the descriptive characteristics for people with ISTJ preferences. Notice also for the ISTJ that the third and fourth functions are opposites of the first two. And the theory of type suggests that the third and fourth functions are less in control of the individual, less used. When they are used, they're often a little bit more awkward than those first two. So right from knowing your order of preferences, it's possible to suggest what might be strengths for an individual and what might be possible blind spots for an individual. So this notion of order of preferences is a key notion in understanding psychological type. Here's another key notion of psychological type. This is one of my favorites on the next slide. It's referred to as the Z model. It's a method of approaching problem solving. And I've had great success. This has been a source of lots of ahas with my clients in workshops and in individual work. So remember, Isabel always said that when people went through an MBTI experience, she wanted them, whoever they were, to get a slight positive boost to their self-esteem. She also said that of the 16 types that are possible, there is no one way to be. There is no one preferred type. There is no one type that you could look at and say, oh boy, that could be troublesome. Each one of them brings contributions, and each one of the 16 types has possible blind spots. So, very positive approach to personality. But as I read through the type literature, one of the areas that I've found where it says, well, yes, that's all true, that's all fine, but here's a suggested way to do it, and that refers to that it is problem solving. The suggestion is, when you have, whatever your type is, when you have a problem to solve that is complex and important, you could do it this way, as suggested by the Z showing on your screen. Start with sensing. Ask yourself and your team or your fellow decision makers, what are the facts? What's the data? What have we done so far? How did we get here? What's the history of this? And once you've got a complete understanding of that, then move on to intuition and say to yourself and your team or partner, well, given all of those facts, what does that all mean? What's the executive summary of all of that? And what are some alternatives and options that we might pursue? What's the future look like if we pursue option A? What's the future look like if we try option B? Then, after sensing and intuition, it's suggested that you move on to the thinking function. That is to say, all right, given all of those facts and given that understanding of what the facts mean, logically and analytically, what are the consequences of all of this? What should we do? What are the risks and benefits of those two choices? And then finally, after you've gone through those three, is to then move on to the feeling function. That is that notion of, am I okay with plan A and with plan B? Does that suit my values? Am I going to be able to really get behind this? Can I sell that to my people? Am I okay with this? So the idea of the Z model is that in order to make a decision that is complete, that you need to touch all four bases here in order to make a home run, to borrow a metaphor. But you can see those function pairs that I've got in red on the slide, ISTJ and ENFP. You can see from the four letters that they are, in psychological type terms, they are opposites. So imagine that person with ISTJ preferences comes into the problem-solving process. He or she dives into the facts, the sensing, and says, well, what's the data say? What have we done? Then they skip quickly over N and go directly to T and say, okay, logically, what should we do? Let's do this. Good, we're done. However, that person with ENFP preferences that may be on the very same team comes into that problem-solving situation and quickly skips over the sensing, those facts, oh, facts, schmacks, ugh, I know what that all means, and they quickly go to their intuition. They then skip over thinking, says the theory, and go quickly to making a decision based on their feelings about their intuition. And then they say they're done. So that you can see that for the ISTJs and ENFPs, there are parts of this Z problem-solving model where they'll shine, and there are parts of the problem-solving model where they will struggle. Now, I've used this in team-building situations, and you can see it happening. You divide the team into sub-teams. You present them with sensing questions on an issue that's important to the team. The sensors will dive right into that exercise, and the intuitives in the room will try to answer the sensing questions in intuitive-like ways. And vice versa, when we get onto the intuitive portion of the problem-solving method, those sensors will try to answer the intuitive questions in sensing-like ways, and so on. So it's a great exercise in a team-building situation or in work with an individual for problem solving. You could use something like this to choose what should be your next car when you're working at home. You can use it for just about anything. Let's go on to the next slide about assessment options. The MBTI is offered in 3 different ways. There is step 1, as we refer to it. Step 1 delivers a 4-letter type. Step 1 is accessed through Form M of the indicator. And just about everything that I've been mentioning thus far in this presentation has had to do with step 1. There is something called MBTI Complete. That is also a step 1 application, but it does some work for you, and I'll show you what that is in just a minute on another slide. But I did want to mention that there is also something called step 2. It's more detailed than step 1. It includes step 1. It includes the 4-letter type, but also gives you detailed information on 20 subscales, or they're called facets, for the 4-letter type. Let me take you on to the next slide and talk to you about step 1. You'll see this is a page from the MBTI profile report. You can see in the type off to the left, it suggests that in order to get a report like this, you need to respond to the 93 items of the indicator, and you get that 4-letter type. And we mentioned the multiple applications. I've given you a few ideas of applications for the MBTI step 1. On the next slide, there's some detail about the MBTI Complete. Now, one of the key things about running an MBTI workshop, one of the first things you are supposed to do, and it is suggested in many of the support resources for the MBTI, like the manual and like the using the MBTI tool and organizations resource binder, it suggests that one of your first exercises with a group or an individual should be to have them verify their type and select the best fit type. And occasionally they'll take the 4-letter type that is indicated by the MBTI and may want to change one of the letters to say, you know what, I'm not so sure about that ENFP. I'm thinking ENFJ. So you take them through an exercise so that they get to verify their own type. Very important first step. And it's that verified type is the one that you should use in your workshop or in your work with them. But here's the problem. If you've been asked by an organization to come in, start at 8:30 in the morning and finish by noon, that verification exercise takes up some time. It can take maybe a half an hour, maybe even up to an hour, depending on the size of your group and the activities that you pick. And that's valuable time, especially if you've just got 2.5 to 3 hours to work with an individual or with a group. Well, the MBTI Complete solves that for you. It allows an individual to take the MBTI online and go through an interactive exercise online that helps them select what they think is their own verified type. Then they bring that information with them to your workshop. And when you start with verified type, well, you're basically hitting the ground running. So it's a real time saver. So that's MBTI Complete. I also have a page here just from a booklet that's on the next slide for the MBTI Step 2. This one comes from a booklet called Understanding Your MBTI Step 2 Results. It's a little takeaway that I buy whenever I'm using the MBTI Step 2. I buy it for each one of my participants so that they can go through an exercise of understanding and verifying their own Step 2 results. You can see, and from the red type for Step 2, it's a different form of the indicator. It's called Form Q. It doesn't have 93 items like Step 1. It has 144 items. It includes the 93, but it adds a number of others in order to give you a 4-letter type as well as those 20 facet scales, 5 for each one of the 4 dichotomies. You can see that. I hope you can read that on that slide. You can see that there are 5 of them for the extroversion-introversion dichotomy, initiating versus receiving, expressive versus contained, gregarious versus intimate, and so on. So basically, the MBTI Step 2, again, gives you that 4-letter type, but it gives you much more detail underlying the 4-letter type. I like it because it allows you to explore with your clients the differences within each one of the type. If you had 100 ENFPs in a room, well, good luck with that, if you know any ENFPs. But if you have 100 ENFPs in a room, they'd all have something in common with one another, but they'd also be all quite unique too. And the MBTI Step 2 with those extra scales allows you to see how is this particular ENFP or ISTJ or ISTP, how are they living out their life? What do they emphasize? So MBTI Step 2 gives you lots of detail.